Number 1. Cleveland Torso Murders. Most people think of Eliot Ness and immediately associate him with Al Capone. However, the famous American lawman was also involved in one of the most infamous and brutal serial murder cases in United States history. Only this time, Ness would not get his man. In fact, to this day, the Cleveland Torso murders, perpetrated by a man known as the Mad Butcher of Kingsbury Run, remain unsolved. In fact, his inability to find the murderer is said to have been the cause of his descent into alcoholism. From 1934 to 1938, the Mad Butcher brutally murdered 13 people, generally leaving only the torsos of the corpses behind. In all, 7 men and 6 women were murdered, with only 2 victims ever having been identified. 2 men were arrested in suspicion of being the Mad Butcher, but they were never convicted. The first suspect, Frank Dolezal, had originally confessed but later recanted and died in custody. The second suspect, Dr. Francis Sweeney, failed a polygraph test but was released due to lack of evidence. Ness's journal hints that he knew who the killer was but could never prove it. And if the untouchable Eliot Ness was unable to prove who the killer was, that's probably a pretty good indication that these are murders that will go forever unsolved. Number 2. Henry STARR and the Stevens County Treasure. Of the many famous outlaws who roamed and terrorized the West World, Henry STARR stands out one of the most interesting. Yet few people today remember him. From a young age, Henry was exposed to a life of crime in his native Oklahoma. The so-called Cherokee Bad Boy was the last in a long line of thieves and criminals, which also included the famed Belle STARR, one of his close relatives. He began his career as a small-time bandit by stealing and taking horses, eventually escalating to murder when he gunned down a deputy US Marshal in 1892. He was imprisoned for these crimes, but later released on technicality. When he got out of prison, he changed career directions, producing a movie about Stroud robbery that was highly successful, with 2 imitation flicks that quickly followed. Other movie companies began to call and ask him to stage bank robberies for them, which he happily complied. However, he seemingly could not give up his first career choice. While filming at Stroud, he robbed the bank at Chandler, and then another in Davenport. He was still negotiating with a California movie company when he was shot and killed while robbing a bank at Harrison on February 23, 1921. During his long run as a criminal, he claimed to have stolen over $60,000 by the time of his death in 1921. None of this is a mystery though. The real mystery pertains to a large stash of loot he supposedly buried somewhere near the Cimarron River in Stevens County, Kansas. STARR reportedly told others that he hid his secret cash in a spot where nobody would find it in a million years. So far, no one has come forward with the loot in 95 years since the outlaw's death, so maybe his prediction will stay true. Number 3. The Killing Fields of Texas. Since the 1970s, more than 30 young women have disappeared or have been found dead along the Interstate 45 between Galveston and Houston in Texas, a 50-mile stretch of road that has been nicknamed the Highway of Hell due to the high frequency of traffic accidents. It is also a desolate, remote area and one that has become a dumping ground for bodies. One major element of a perfect killing field is a hot, damp climate, something that Texas has in spades. The weather plays a tremendous part, especially humidity, heat and weather change. It makes a body deteriorate so much faster. While the remoteness of the location can make it desirable in short term, it's the influence of the surrounding terrain and weather that makes it a prime candidate for a killer. Most of the cases related to 30 bodies recovered so far remain unsolved, and some of the girls even remain unidentified to this day. There are some striking similarities among victims, young girls with similar physical features and hairstyles, between the ages of 10 and 25. Investigators believe that a portion of deaths are work of a single serial killer. Others attribute the killings to migrant workers from the local oil rigs or truck drivers who only pass through for a limited periods of time. Many of the investigations have turned up only dead ends and unlikely suspects, leaving more questions than answers. Number 4. The AXEMAN of New Orleans Murders. For almost a year, the city of New Orleans had been the subject of multiple attacks by a serial killer, an axe murderer who to this day have never been identified. The mysterious figure is known to the history as the Axeman of the New Orleans. And while it is impossible to verify whether he is responsible for all the murders ascribed to him, it is a fact that from May of 1918 until October of 1919, 12 people were attacked across Great New Orleans, 7 of whom died from their brutal wounds. In almost every case, a small hole was carved out of a door. The axeman would crawl through this opening and then bludgeon his victims with an axe. Curiously, the weapon employed was often in the house and left at the scene of the crime along with the chisel used to break through the door. The victims of the Axeman had qualities in common. They were mainly women. Men only suffered blows if they got in the Axeman's way and never seemed to be the primary target. Many of the victims were Italian Americans. On March 13, 1919, a letter purporting to be from Axeman was published in newspapers which read, "They have never caught me, and they never will. They have never seen me, for I am invisible, even as the ether that surrounds your earth. I am not a human being, but a spirit and a demon from the hottest hell. I am what your Orleanians and your foolish police call the Axeman," and offered the terrified citizens of New Orleans a proposition that he would kill again at 15 minutes past midnight on the night of March 19, but would spare the occupants of any place where a jazz band was playing. It's impossible to know whether the Axeman truly wrote this letter. Nevertheless, that night all of New Orleans dance halls were filled to capacity, and professional and amateur bands played jazz at parties at hundreds of houses around town. There were no murders that night. The Axeman was not caught or identified, and his crime spree stopped as mysteriously as it had started. The murderer's identity remains anonymous to this day. Number 5. Levelland UFO sightings. One of the most incredible UFO sightings in ufology occurred on November 2, 1957, when dozens reported strange things in the skies over Levelland, Texas. The sheriff's office and on-duty patrolman A.J. Fowler were flooded with calls from scared citizens reporting bright lights in the sky. Shortly after 11 p.m., Pedro Saucedo and Joe Salas called in when their pickup truck suddenly rolled to a stop as they watched a 61-meter cigar-shaped object fly overhead. Moments later, their truck started back up again, as if nothing happened. For the time being, Fowler shrugged off the report. Later, however, more reports came in from others claiming that their vehicles had stalled while either watching a UFO in the sky above or encountering bright objects just sitting on the road. Fowler wrote down that the sheriff's office took over 15 calls on these strange lights. At 1:30 a.m., Sheriff Clem and Deputy McKellar left the station to track down the lights in the sky. Just outside of Levelland, they witnessed a large glowing object fly over the highway ahead of them. For about 3 hours, the skies over Levelland and surrounding area were filled with strange lights. Dozens of witnesses came forward, and the Air Force conducted a brief investigation. They said the UFOs and lights were nothing more than ball lightning, a natural weather anomaly. While lightning was spotted hours later in nearby Lubbock, many still claim something truly paranormal was over Levelland on that odd autumn night. Number 6. KEDDIE Camp Murders. KEDDIE, a quiet and peaceful resort town of log cabins, was the site of horrific quadruple homicide in 1981. On the night of April 11, 14-year-old Sheila Sharp had gone to a neighbor's house to spend the night. When she came home in the morning, she found that her mother, Sue, her brother Johnny, and his friend Dana had all been tied up and starved to death. Her younger sister Tina was missing. Yet her younger brothers, Ricky and Greg, and their friend Justin were unharmed in the brothers' bedroom. The police were at a loss to uncover a killer or a motive. The murder victims had been relentlessly tortured. Sue and Johnny had been struck with a hammer, and Dana had been strangled. The stabbing had been so violent that the blade of the murder weapon, a steak knife, was bent backward. Incredibly, Ricky and Greg said they had slept through the attack, but Justin changed his story several times. In one of his accounts, he said that he witnessed the murders and Tina being taken. In other statements, he claimed to have dreamed the incidents he described. In 1984, Tina's skull was found 50 kilometers away from KEDDIE. Her cause of death could not be determined, but it seemed that she had died the night of the attack. Meanwhile, the search for the murderer was at a standstill. There were still no suspects, although Justin's father, Martin Smart, and his friend Bo Boweed acted strangely when they were interviewed by the police. Smart even described how the murders might have been carried out, yet was never pressed further. Years after the murders, his therapist claimed that Smart once said that he had killed Sue because she encouraged his wife to divorce him. He supposedly killed Tina too, but denied killing Johnny and Dana. Both Smart and Burbide are long dead. However, the case remains officially unsolved. Number 7. Dighton Rock. Dighton Rock is a 40-ton boulder that was discovered in Taunton River of Berkeley, Massachusetts. It's remarkable for its mysterious markings. The markings are seemingly inconsistent with any particular writing style, and the mysterious origins of the rock have baffled many. Throughout the years, a number of theories have been floated as to who the creators of cryptic inscription may be. One of the most popular theories is that the markings are Norse in origin. This theory suggests that the rock was a portrayal of Viking voyage into the area as early as AD 1000. Another popular theory suggests that the markings are the work of Native Americans. There was a significant population of natives in the area where the rock was found, and similar markings have been found and attributed to various native tribes across the northeast. Other theories suggest that ancient Phoenicians, the Portuguese, and the Chinese may be responsible for the markings. Number 8. The Springfield Three. On June 6, 1992, friends Susie Streeter and Stacy McCall graduated high school and celebrated around Springfield, Missouri. They attended various parties and planned to spend the night at friends' house, but the house was too crowded with relatives visiting for graduation. So sometime in the early hours of the 7th, the two girls went back to Susie's house, where she lived with her mother Cheryl. Sometime between 2 a.m. and 8 a.m. on the night of 7th, all three women vanished. A high school friend of the girls came looking for them at the house at around 8 in the morning. She found the globe over the porch light smashed and the front door open. Except for the broken light fixture, there was no other sign of foul play. But all the women's purses and cigarettes were in the home, and the family's dog appeared to be extremely agitated. The bed seemed to have been slept in. While the teenager was still in the house, the phone rang. The caller was a male who said lewd sexual things until the friend hung up, after which the man called back. The calls freaked the friend out enough that she left the house. Later that afternoon, Janice McCall, Stacy's mother, arrived at the house looking for her daughter and found the same strange scene. She immediately felt that there was something wrong and called the police to report three women missing. Unfortunately, while playing the messages on Cheryl's machine, McCall deleted a message from an unknown man which the police felt could have been an evidence. It's been 24 years and the three women have never been found. There have been some suspects linked to the case, like the convicted kidnapper Robert Cox. Cox is a convicted kidnapper and a suspected murderer who was living in the area at the time of the crime. He has given several leading statements to the local media, claiming that he knows the women are dead and that they are buried close to Springfield. But the police aren't sure if he is legit or if he is only trying to get attention. Cox is currently serving time in a Texas prison for aggravated robbery. Probably the most talked about theory is that the women are buried underneath a parking garage at Cox Hospital, which was being constructed around that time. Reports say radar detected 3 anomalies in the concrete that could be the women, though the police either haven't found this credible or haven't taken it seriously. Number 9. Disappearance from national parks across US. Over 1,100 people have disappeared from US national parks and open spaces in the past 100 years. Most cases can be chalked up to people getting lost and succumbing to elements. However, a surprisingly large percentage cannot be explained at all. Most of those who have disappeared are children ages 20 months to 12 years and the elderly ages from 74 to 85. 50% of the children who have gone missing are found dead, and the ones who are found miles away from where they disappeared, in areas seemingly impossible for them to get to on their own. The majority of children who have disappeared had dogs with them. In some cases, the dogs returned, but the children never did. Children found alive won't talk about their experience, or say they don't remember what happened to them. They are found usually running low-grade fever and appear traumatized. In all cases, the parents say that the child was right behind them when they disappeared. Usually, the children were wearing bright, colorful clothing when they disappear, and even if they were found miles away without the shoes they were wearing, their feet are not scratched or bruised. Yosemite National Park, with 40 to 45 cases, has the largest cluster of vanishings, and oddly, in most areas where the disappearances have occurred, huckleberries are almost always in great abundance. In 95% of the cases, bad weather strangely follows a disappearance, washing out footprints or other clues and making it impossible to carry on a search until the weather clears. In 98 to 99% of the cases, tracking dogs are unable to find a scent or simply refuse to track. Almost 98% of the disappearances occur in the afternoon. Searchers have been known to cover an area over 100 times, only to later find the person alive or dead in the same area they searched before. One of the strangest finds by the rangers was a missing man who was found leaning against a log, his pants around his ankles. The only parts left of him were part of his tibia in his right pant leg and part of his skull and his scapula bones in 1 inch by 1 inch pieces. The National Park Service doesn't keep sufficient records on these vanishings, and in fact it appears to be hiding this information from the public. Number 10. Bear Brook Murders. On November 10, 1985, a hunter came across a tipped-over 55-gallon drum and trash near Bear Brook State Park in Allenstown, New Hampshire. Inside the drum, he found the remains of an adult woman who was around 23 to 33 years old and a little girl who was roughly 5 to 11 years old, wrapped in plastic. The New Hampshire State Police immediately began to check missing people cases from the 70s and 80s, but were unable to identify the bodies. In 1986, the New Hampshire State Police believed the case would finally be solved when they suspected 2 missing people named Grace Riap and her 5-year-old daughter Gracie were the unidentified bodies found a year earlier. But the dental records proved the unidentified remains found in the 55-gallon drum were not those of Grace or her daughter Gracie Riap. Over the years, New Hampshire State Police received hundreds of leads and distributed composite drawings of victims throughout the Northeast and Quebec, Canada. But all their efforts proved futile. In 2000, the case took another turn when it was assigned to a different New Hampshire state trooper. The officer returned to the area where the bodies were discovered in 55-gallon drum and stumbled upon yet another 55-gallon drum. 2 bodies were also found inside that drum, and this time they were both young female children. DNA determined that the remains of 2 little girls found in 2000 were linked to the adult woman found in 1985. The remains found in 2000 were that of a white female child 1 to 3 years old, and another white female child 2 to 4 years old. It was concluded that they all died around the same time, in the late 1970s or early 1980s. It's assumed that the barrels were both there in 1985 when the first one was found, and the second just wasn't spotted then because of the nature of the area. According to the investigators, all 4 of the victims would have appeared Caucasian, but may have been at least partially Native American due to having what is called the shovel teeth, a certain tooth shape that was very common among Native Americans. They all died from blows to the head with a blunt object, had evidence of other injuries, and were partially dismembered. It is not suspected that they were murdered by a serial killer. The nature of the way they were killed suggests that it was personal. The New Hampshire Cold Case Unit are still trying to identify the remains found in 1985 and 2000. There are no current suspects in the case, and the identification of all the female victims is still unknown.